At 2:17 in the morning, I was sitting in my Tesla in our own driveway. The steering wheel was cold, but not as cold as the wedding ring on my finger. I looked at the house. Our house. The one Ben bought with his bonus. Glass, and correct, and dead. The house where, I assumed, my husband was asleep. And I had just come from another man. I turned the engine off. The silence was deafening. The house was dark, except for one window. Ben's office. He was up, of course. He was optimizing. Code, finances, our life. I looked down at my hands on the wheel. They smelled like sandalwood soap. Not my soap, which smells like grapefruit. Not Ben's soap, which is unscented because scents are inefficient. This was Julian's soap. The smell of wood, and warmth, and something real. I sat there, motionless. 10 minutes. 15. I couldn't make myself go inside. Go inside and become Eliza again, the Austin Tech wife. The wife who pretends everything is fine. And then my phone, resting on the passenger seat, buzzed. The bright screen cut through the darkness. A calendar reminder. 8:30 a.m. I had said it myself, 6 weeks ago. 2 words. Our last chance. I knew what it was. And I knew that just now, in a downtown loft that smelled like sandalwood, I had destroyed it. Ben is a good man. I have to start with that. He doesn't drink. He doesn't yell. He doesn't hit. He's just, not here. He was never here. Not even when he was sitting right across from me at our huge, reclaimed oak dining table. Our life is a shared Google Calendar. Our passion is a weekly 30-minute sync on Sundays, to, as he put it, discuss the upcoming sprint. He would ask what my key performance indicators were for the week. All I wanted was for him to ask how I was. 2 months ago, he sold his startup. I don't even know for how many zeros. He celebrated. He bought that ridiculous, angular Cybertruck. He didn't ask me. He just came home with it, beaming. He said he ran the numbers, and it was the most efficient capital investment. That night, I sat in our perfectly white kitchen, trying to force a smile. I asked him, Ben, do you remember what today is? He looked at me with those empty, gray eyes. He said it was Thursday. It was the 5th anniversary. The 5th anniversary of our last, hardest round of IVF. The day Dr. Reynolds, the best in Austin, looked at me with that professional pity. He said he was sorry, but medically, there was nothing more to hope for. He advised us to move on. Ben shook his hand. He thanked the doctor for his time and his data. Data. That's what it was to him. For me, it was a death. Ben was celebrating the birth of his company. I was mourning the death of our family. That night, while he was out driving his Cybertruck, I went to yoga. I lied. I never went to yoga. I went to the basement of the First Baptist Church. It smelled musty, like old carpets and terrible coffee. A grief support group. I sat in a circle of people mourning husbands, wives, brothers. And I was the only one mourning a child that never existed. And he was there. Julian. He wasn't like the others. He didn't look broken. He looked calm. He said he had lost his brother. He was an architect restorer. He said he brings old houses back to life. He was the only one who looked at me. Really looked. He didn't see the Austin Tech wife. He didn't see the failure. He just saw me. Our affair didn't start in bed. God, no. It started with a conversation. 2 weeks later, in that same church parking lot, in the rain. He just asked what it was like. And I told him. Not about the IVF. Not about the clinic. I told him about the silence. About the house that felt like a museum. About the husband who optimized the life out of our life. I told him about Thursday. He listened. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't offer solutions. He just nodded. And then he told me about his brother. About how stupidly he died. And how he, Julian, was trying to find meaning in fixing things that were broken. He touched my hand. Just my hand. It was the most intimate touch I'd felt in 5 years. I came back to my car. 2:19 a.m. The "Our Last Chance" reminder was still glowing on the screen. It wasn't just a reminder. It was the frozen embryo. Our only one, our last one, that we had kept all these years. The procedure I had booked in secret, in desperation, hoping Ben would wake up. And I realized Julian didn't just listen. He gave me what Ben had taken away. He gave me permission to feel. And now I was sitting here, smelling like his soap, knowing I hadn't just betrayed my husband. I had betrayed that last, tiny, frozen hope waiting in the cryo tank at the Galloway clinic. With Julian, everything was easy. That was the scariest part. It was easy. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. Our meetings at the support group got shorter. But our talks in the parking lot got longer. We drank that awful church coffee and just talked. He would talk about old brickwork, about how wood holds history. I told him about the kids I work with. About a little boy with cerebral palsy who held a spoon for the first time. Julian listened like it mattered. To Ben, my job was just a nice hobby. Something that looked good on our tax returns. One day, instead of the group, he drove me downtown. He wanted to show me a house he was restoring. An old Victorian mansion the city wanted to tear down. Inside, it smelled like dust, and wood, and hope. He ran his hand along the carved banister. He said his job was to find what was still alive under all the layers of paint and rot. He said every house has a soul. He was looking right at me, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the house. Ben, meanwhile, was busy scaling his new project. He replaced our real lawn with AstroTurf because it saved 1,500 gallons of water a year and required 0 minutes of maintenance. He installed smart blinds that opened and closed with the sun to optimize the electric bill. I was living in the smartest, most efficient, and coldest house in Austin. That day, in the Victorian mansion, Julian touched my face. He just ran a finger along my cheek. He asked what I was thinking. I told him the truth. I said I felt like a ghost in my own life. That my husband looked at me and only saw an inefficient variable in his equation. He didn't say I was beautiful. He didn't say Ben was a fool. He said there are no ghosts. Just people who have been forced to be quiet. It happened right there. On the floor, covered in dust and wood shavings. It wasn't like sex with Ben, which was scheduled, and clean, and focused on results. This was messy. And warm. And for the first time in years, I could feel my own body. I was alive. After that, I started lying more. Yoga. Meetings with friends. Working late. Ben didn't notice. Or he didn't want to notice. His metrics were fine. His house was working. His wife was home by 7 o'clock. The fact that her soul was downtown in a dusty mansion didn't fit into his data. I was ready. I was going to tell Ben. I deserved to be happy. I deserved to feel alive. I was driving to Julian's loft, rehearsing the words. What I would say to Ben. That we needed to talk. That it wasn't him, it was me. That I couldn't live like this anymore. I felt strong. That was last night. The night that led me to my car at 2 in the morning. Julian's loft. Unlike my house, it was chaos. Books, sketches, the smell of espresso and sandalwood. He was in the shower. I smiled. I felt like a teenager who had stolen a piece of happiness. I walked over to his desk. I was going to leave a silly note on a post-it. And I saw his laptop. It was open. The screen wasn't showing architecture. It was a photo. A photo of Ben. He was speaking at some conference. The picture was taken from the audience. Ben on stage, confident, in his gray polo shirt uniform. And underneath the picture, a file was open. A text document. I shouldn't have read it. I read it. The file's title was Project Ben Holloway. And inside, it wasn't just a biography. It had details. Details only I could know. The names of our favorite restaurants. The fact that I hate white lilies. And a date. That specific Thursday. The IVF anniversary. Next to that date, there was a note. Vulnerability. Level, critical. Use for first contact. I stared at those words. Use for first contact. Julian hadn't just met me at the support group. He hadn't just lost his brother. He was waiting for me there. I heard the water in the shower shut off. I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The sound of the shower stopping was like a gunshot in the quiet loft. Another minute, and he'd be out. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen. Vulnerability. Level, critical. Use for first contact. My grief. My pain. My desperation and infertility. It wasn't my tragedy. It was his leverage. He came out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist. His hair was wet, and he was smiling. He looked happy. He said something about making espresso. I didn't turn around. I couldn't look away from the screen. I just asked him what Project Ben Holloway was. Silence. An absolute, ringing silence. The smell of coffee and sandalwood suddenly felt thick, suffocating. He stopped smiling. I heard his voice change. He said I shouldn't be looking at his laptop. That's when I turned. I looked at him. At the man who had lost his brother. The man who understood my silence. I asked him if his brother was even real. I asked if that support group was just market research. He didn't lie. And somehow, that was the worst part. He didn't make excuses. He just sighed. As if I was the one ruining everything. He ran a hand through his wet hair. He said it wasn't personal. It was just a job. A job. He said that sure, he's an architect, but his real business is different. He called it vulnerability consulting. I didn't understand at first. He was a corporate spy. A hunter. I felt the nausea rising in my throat. My hands were shaking. I asked who hired him. He said it didn't matter. Competitors. People who wanted what Ben had built. They were looking for leverage. And I was the leverage. My pain. My emptiness. My desperate, secret hope for a baby. He knew everything. He knew about the IVF. He knew about Thursday. He admitted he waited for me at that church. He knew my schedule. He knew I'd be broken. He knew I'd be easy prey. He stepped closer. He tried to touch me. I flinched away, like he was on fire. He told me to wait. He said he was just doing his job, but he didn't expect this. He said he didn't expect it to feel real. I laughed. It was an awful, dry, barking sound. I asked him if the sex was also part of the project. If that was written down in his report. His face hardened. He told me I needed to be careful. That I was in a game where I didn't even know the rules. I told him he was the game. He shook his head. He said I thought he was the monster. But I should be asking myself something else. Why did Ben, my brilliant, data-obsessed husband, never once question my evening yoga classes? He said Ben isn't an idiot. He asked if I ever thought, maybe, I wasn't the only one being watched. He said the people who hired him play for keeps. And there were rumors. That Ben's company, his great achievement, was built on something shaky. That Ben was desperate to sell before it all fell apart. I didn't want to hear any more. I grabbed my purse. The man I thought was my salvation was just a contractor. The connection I thought was real was just a business deal. He grabbed my arm. He told me to wait, that it wasn't what it looked like. I looked at his hand on my wrist. Then at his face. I asked him if the sandalwood soap was on his expense report too. I yanked my arm away. I ran. I didn't wait for the elevator. I ran down the concrete stairs, 6 flights. The smell of sandalwood was on my clothes, in my hair, on my skin. I felt dirty. Used. I made it to my car. My perfect, quiet, efficient Tesla. The car Ben bought me. And that's how I ended up in my driveway at 2:17 a.m. A ghost, smelling like another man's lie, staring at the house where a husband I didn't even know lived. The phone screen was dark, but I knew the reminder was still there. 8:30 a.m. Our last chance. I sat in the car for another 10 minutes. The sandalwood smell seemed to have sunk into my skin. I had to wash it off. I had to get in the shower before he woke up. I finally opened the car door. The silence in the driveway was so thick it was ringing. I quietly opened the front door. Our smart house didn't beep, it recognized me. I walked in like a thief. I slipped my shoes off on the mat. I just wanted to sneak upstairs, into the shower, wash Julian off me, wash this night off me, and in the morning, I would deal with 8:30. I made it to the kitchen. And I froze. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't in his office. He was sitting at our huge, white quartz kitchen island. In the dark. The only light came from his laptop, open in front of him. The cold LED light carved his face out of the shadows, making him look like a mask. He didn't look up. He just waited, letting me stand there, holding my breath. Then he spoke. His voice was flat, no emotion. Like he was dictating a note. He said I was late. I swallowed. I couldn't say anything. He was still staring at his screen. He said we had a big morning. That our last chance was scheduled for 8:30. He said it like he was reminding me to take out the trash. That coldness. That everydayness. It was worse than if he had screamed. And I broke. I just fell apart. Right there on the cold Italian tile. I slid down the wall. I started talking. I couldn't stop. The words just poured out of me, mixed with tears and disgust for myself. I told him everything. That there was no yoga. That there was a support group. That there was a man. I told him his name was Julian. That he was a liar. That he was a spy, hired by his competitors to find leverage on him, on Ben. I told him about Project Ben Holloway. I told him how I was used. How my grief was just a critical vulnerability. I was sobbing. I told him I was so sorry. That I was so stupid. That I had ruined everything trying to get away from him, and I had just walked right into a trap. I waited. I waited for him to explode. To throw that laptop. To call me a whore. To destroy me. He didn't. He slowly, with a quiet click, closed the lid of his laptop. The kitchen went dark. The only sounds were my sobbing and the hum of the high-tech refrigerator. Then he finally looked up at me. I could barely see him in the dim light coming from the living room. His voice was just as quiet. He said I was late. I didn't understand. He said I wasn't late tonight. He said I was late with this confession. By 6 weeks. I stopped crying. He said that, of course, he knew. He had known everything. From the first week. From the first yoga class. He reached for a drawer. Not the one with the knives. The one where he kept charging cables and junk. He pulled out a thin, gray audio recorder. He pressed a button. I heard my own voice. Laughing. And then Julian's voice. We were in that coffee shop. Talking about old houses. He pressed stop. He told me I still didn't get it. He opened the drawer again and tossed a stack of photos onto the counter. Glossy, color photos. Me and Julian at the church. Me and Julian getting into his old pickup truck. Me and Julian, walking into his loft. Tonight. An hour ago. I asked him if he hired a detective. He almost smiled. He said of course he did. He said he's a programmer. He sees patterns. And my behavioral pattern had changed. He said I had become an unpredictable variable. And he doesn't tolerate unpredictable variables. I looked at the pictures. My whole secret life, laid out on the kitchen counter like a report. I whispered that he must hate me. And that's when he said the thing that stopped my heart. He said hate is an inefficient emotion. But information is not. He said I thought Julian had tricked me. But the truth was, I was just a pawn in a game he, Ben, was playing. I asked him what he was talking about. He said I was right about one thing. His competitors were looking for leverage. He knew they were coming for him. He knew they were looking for a vulnerability. He said that when a programmer knows he's going to be hacked, he builds a honeypot. A fake target. A lure that looks real but is really a trap to lead the hacker down a false path. I stared at him, not understanding. He said that he, Ben, had accidentally left his laptop open at that Starbucks where he knew their man was sitting. He accidentally left his calendar open. The calendar that noted all my therapy appointments. All my failed IVF cycles. All my pain, documented in detail. He said he fed them the bait. I wasn't breathing. He said it wasn't me. It was Eliza. The emotionally unstable, desperate, perfect lure. He didn't just let it happen. He planned it. My affair. My betrayal. It was his strategy. It was his defense. He sacrificed me to protect his company. He said that while Julian was so busy with me, he, Ben, had managed to close the sale. He looked at me. At the wife who had just confessed to an affair. He didn't look like a man who'd been betrayed. He looked like a man who had just won a chess game. He said I looked terrible. He said I should go shower, that the sandalwood smell was too obvious. He said he needed to get a couple of hours of sleep before his morning meetings. I didn't move. I was still sitting on the ice-cold tile, surrounded by the photos of my betrayal, which turned out to be his plan. I asked him, about 8:30. About our last chance. He stopped at the doorway. He turned. There was nothing in his eyes. No anger, no regret. Just tiredness, like from an annoying task he'd already closed in his tracker. He said, "Oh, that." He told me I didn't need to worry about it. He explained that his honeypot worked, but not as cleanly as he'd planned. That the competitors, once they realized their spy was exposed and that Ben knew everything, had tried to make trouble for the sale. He said he had to make concessions. That his golden parachute wasn't as golden as he'd planned. That he'd lost millions. He said it like he was complaining about bad weather. I stared at him, still not getting it. He said we needed to tighten our belts. That for the next year, we had to reallocate assets. That we could no longer afford non-essential expenses. I whispered that I didn't know what he meant. His voice got firmer, like he was explaining a simple concept to an idiot. He said the procedure at 8:30. The embryo storage. The whole Galloway clinic. That was a non-essential expense. He said he canceled the procedure. Yesterday. He canceled it. He canceled our last chance. He canceled it like you cancel a subscription service you don't use anymore. He had optimized our unborn child out of our lives. He said I should try to get some sleep. He went upstairs. I heard his quiet, even footsteps going down the hall. I stayed in the kitchen. On the cold tile. Surrounded by the photos. I looked at my hands, the ones I thought smelled like sandalwood. I couldn't smell anything. No scent. No guilt. No love. Empty. This wasn't just an affair. This was an annihilation. And that's the whole story. If you like this story and want to keep hearing more like it, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. Remember, your support is so important to keep this channel growing. And now, let's think about this. We're used to condemning cheating. It's simple. It's clear. But what if the affair isn't the tragedy, but just a symptom of it? What if the real, deep horror isn't the person who looks for warmth somewhere else, but the person who creates such an unbearable cold at home that ice becomes the only reality? What do you think? Who is the real monster in this story? Eliza, who physically betrayed her marriage, desperate to find anything that felt alive? Julian, who cynically used her grief and her body for a job? Or Ben? The husband who never touched another woman, but who was capable of the coldest, most calculated betrayal. He didn't just forgive the affair. He planned it. He sacrificed his wife, her dignity, and in the end, their last chance for a child, all as a move in a business game. Was his faithfulness just a cover for an absolute moral emptiness? Let me know in the comments whose betrayal you think was worse, and if Eliza ever really had any other way out of that frozen house.